Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. It's been a while since my last one, but I've been super busy, and there was also that bug for the damage, so that really delayed my testing across the board, not only for Jean, but for the other characters as well. As you've probably experienced in PvP already, like Timeline, the character is overpowered and somewhat broken, but that is kind of what you get with a native tier 2 character that is now able to become T4, especially Jean, which has historically been kind of all over the place in terms of balance and been really strong. Anyways, there's a lot to cover, and if you're already familiar with the character's performance in PvE and PvP, I'll also be covering how to counter the character not only in Timeline, but also in Alliance Conquest. Unfortunately, most of the testing that I did was before the damage bug was fixed, so the content that you see, you have to keep in mind that she is better now. I think specifically when she is at T4, since the bug seemed to be only affecting damage accumulation for the most part. All the testing that you see in this video is done with a mighty CTP of authority and no artifact. I do, however, have a full ISO 8 set at the highest level, and do actually have some damage Odins as well as some HP Odins too. The standard first test was against Knull on stage 9 with no leadership or supports, just strikers, and she was able to finish that within 2 minutes and 25 seconds left, which, even if a bug was in play, seems to be pretty decent, since around 2 minutes and 30 seconds to 2 minutes and 40 seconds left for my account is basically an indicator that the character is pretty good for PvE. The second test I did was to take her up to stage 25, again with no leadership or supports, and unfortunately she did fall a little bit short and wasn't able to complete the first phase in that 2-minute time frame that indicates that she completed the stage entirely. Although I wasn't able to do the first phase in time, with a leadership and support, she easily would have been able to do so, which I've also done with other characters that didn't have a damage proc, and they were able to complete it, so the fact that she can almost do it without the leadership and support means that she is pretty good. If you're trying to build the character specifically for PvE, a CTP of Rage, like many other characters, is likely your best bet, specifically for things like Alliance Battle Modes and Giant Boss Raid, and probably even World Boss Legend to an extent, but CTP of Judgment Reforged will likely be a little bit ahead in World Boss Legend. However, a CTP of Rage will probably be your best pick overall. For the last World Boss Legend test at level 70, I added in a leadership and support, and going up 15 stages roughly, I wasn't able to complete it in that 2-minute time frame or window to be able to complete the stage entirely. However, if I did bump it down to around 35, it might have been pretty close, and the fact that she is that close without a damage proc is a pretty good indicator that she is still good for PvE. I wasn't able to take the character into Alliance Battle Legend, but in Alliance Battle Extreme, for the Universal Villain Female Day, I was able to score around 8 million, meaning that with a damage proc she should easily be able to go past 9 million and even more once you get her to T4, so she's definitely meta in that. Also keep in mind that she basically has all of the cancel effects with the exception of Fracture. She has Silence, Stun, Paralysis, Snare, Burn, and Incapacitation. I wasn't really able to get the best test in Giant Boss Raid since it was the Universal Day, and even though she does gain a benefit from it, it's not really as good as the ones where the boss is the other typings like Combat, Speed, or Blast. However, despite that, I was still able to complete the first phase in under 2 minutes, which means that she would be able to complete the fight entirely even without the damage proc. At level 80, I was able to complete the first phase about 1 minute and 30 seconds faster, and then was able to complete the stage entirely with roughly about 1 minute and 30 seconds left as well. At stage 39, with the leadership and supports, I saw about 1 minute and 50 second improvement, and was able to complete that stage with 1 minute and 15 seconds remaining. I also took her into a stage 40 of Mephisto, and surprisingly enough, she was able to complete the stage, even though she does have an element damage disadvantage, being fire damage. However, because she is universal type, I think that kind of offset it a bit, which allowed her to complete that fight. I also took her into a stage 30 of Gorr. However, she didn't seem to perform as well in this fight as the other ones, and I don't really think that's because of some specific disadvantage, but more so because Gorr's AI moves around a lot, and most of Jean's damage is AoE damage focused in one area that Gorr can just move out of. After taking the character to level 80, I also did Giant Boss Raid again, and she was able to complete the first phase about 20 seconds faster, which might not seem like a lot, but 20 to 30 seconds faster in the first phase means that the character will likely be able to clear Giant Boss Raid about 1 or 2 minutes faster at the end of the fight. If you're curious how much it cost me to T4 the character, you can see here, these are the materials I had before I T4'd her. So I have around 12,000 Life Seed, close to 9,000 Carbonadium, and close to 13,000 Soul of the Faltine. After taking the character to T4, I ended up using around close to 3,000 Life Seed, close to 7,500 Carbonadium, and about 6,200 Soul of the Faltine. It's not nearly as bad as many people expected with the character being a native tier 2, but despite that, the number of T4 characters that we get with the addition of native tier 2s now means that the devs really do need to provide more avenues for getting T4 materials. Otherwise, the game won't really be that fun if you can only get one T4 character every few months. Also, if you're wondering how you rank up the character from 70 to 80, considering that she doesn't have her own bios, so you can't get kind of the discount that you can with other characters, you have the alternative option of using Phoenix Feathers, which is nice because you have a greater abundance of those materials compared to the drop rate of bios. Jean's instinct type is Order, meaning that if you're considering what strikers to use for her, it's the same ones as Thor. So if you want to know what those are, you can probably check out that Thor T4 video, but probably if you're going to use her for PvE, Thor is likely your best option as a striker for her. Even for PvP, he's a solid option because of the quick burst damage he does, but that won't really matter too much because her T4 has Reflect in it, so by that point the striker won't really make much of a difference since the opponent will likely just reflect themselves to death. In terms of her stat bumps, she doesn't really get too much in terms of HP and energy attack. However, the base amount was already pretty high, so even the small amount she gets now gives her a pretty high overall total anyway. One of the interesting things that I found out after I T4'd the character is that her T4 skill actually fills up probably one of the fastest out of any of the characters so far. You essentially get the T4 skill pretty much twice before you end up getting the ultimate skill or the 6th skill. This means that you can almost get 100% uptime for that damage accumulation, but you have to keep in mind that it resets every time you use it, so I guess it kind of makes sense that she does get it so frequently. Keep in mind that it wasn't really clear what the damage bug was exactly. It was kind of assumed that it was associated with damage accumulation, so the performance would be better after the bug was fixed. However, the improvement that I saw was about 1 minute and 20 seconds faster after I got the T4. To give you a better idea of her current performance, previously with the bug, I was able to complete stage 54 with 1 minute and 14 seconds left, and after the bug was fixed, the time clear improved by 1 minute and 30 seconds. On Mephisto, from level 80 to T4 saw 1 minute and 30 second improvement, but in reality, once the bug was fixed, it was closer to 2 minutes and 40 seconds. So you can see why so many people were irritated, because that bug made a massive difference in terms of the damage output that you had, and it was very difficult to tell how much of an improvement and how much better or even how good the new characters are. By new characters, I obviously mean new uniforms, with the obvious exception of Polaris. On stage 30 of Knull, I got to that 9 health bar mark as I did when I was level 80, about 1 minute and 50 seconds faster. I was also able to complete the stage with 42 seconds left. But you can see that once the bug was fixed and I tested again, I was actually able to complete the stage 1 minute and 20 seconds faster than before, meaning that the clear time was even faster than the minute and 50 seconds that I mentioned previously when you get her to T4. You can see the major difference that the bug fix made in Alliance battle modes, which was another reason why people, including myself, were so annoyed, because it was stripping us from getting rewards there. So with the no restrictions, I was able to score around 10 million with the T4, and then once the bug was fixed, I got over 1 million more. So yeah, it made a big difference. Also, the fact that I was less than 1 million points away from capping out on Alliance Battle Extreme with no damage proc should give you an idea of how strong and good she is for that mode, as well as PvE in general. At this point, you're likely wondering what Jean's skill rotation is, or at least what is the one that I used. And the one that I would recommend is to do 5 with a slight delay cancel after about a half second into 4, which you can quick cancel into 3. Do a slight delay cancel till the camera shifts a little bit, and then do 1 with a slight delay cancel again with about a half second into 2. So to sum up, the rotation would be 5, delay cancel 4, cancel 3, delay cancel 1, with a slight delay cancel into 2. Because I didn't have a damage proc, you'll likely see me opening with the 4th skill first and then going into the 5th skill, just so I can start spamming skills more quickly, but that is basically the rotation that you want to use. You can basically use your ultimate skill whenever it's available and your damage proc is ready to use. However, I tend to wait till my 5, 4, or 3 skill are off cooldown, so I can use those quickly and stack the damage on top of the ult. When you have access to the T4 skill, you basically want to use that every time it's up, because you want to get the damage accumulation going and because you end up charging it so quickly. I completed Giant Boss Raid with about 2 minutes and 20 seconds left. However, this was during the bug, and unfortunately it wasn't fixed in time for me to test on the universal version of the boss to see what the difference was, but I'd expect that it would be at least 2 minutes faster, if not more, since I'm constantly being able to spam the T4 skill, which wasn't really being taken into account before the bug was fixed. Although you can definitely see that the character is good for PvE, she doesn't get her reputation of being broken or overpowered from that mode, but rather from PvP. Many people are well aware of this, and you can see that with the new uniform, even at level 70, she is already causing commotion. One of the reasons why the character is so good in PvP and why she was in the past before all the characters started to catch up to her is because she had super guard break, which not many characters had. And now the 5th skill continues that tradition, having super guard break, and the reason that it's so good is because it's a skill where you can cast it and forget it. So once the 5th skill is cast, she can continue on to her other skills, and the 5th skill will super guard break and lock the opponent into position. This makes it especially lethal because unlike other characters, she can cast the 5th skill and then layer on other damage from her other hard-hitting skills, whereas most other characters that have super guard break have to be actively using that skill, meaning that they can't layer on additional damage. Besides this, because the skill goes on whether she's there or not, if the character dies, she still has the potential of not only locking down the opponent, but also killing them from the residual damage that the skill deals. The other key characteristic that the uniform provides her is that she now has iframe ignore, meaning that she has all of the staple skills that you need to make a meta character, and even a broken one. As you may know, the iframe ignore is on the 2nd skill, which is significant for multiple reasons, one of them being that the 2nd skill usually has a low cooldown, which is the case for this as well, meaning that she basically spams the iframe ignore skill constantly and is able to hit the opponent at any time. On top of this, because it has a short cooldown and is one of the earlier skills that come off cooldown when you enter timeline, it means that the character can basically open with that skill right away, and the skill also has super guard break penetration on it, meaning that you can lock the opponent in place and then just spam all of your other skills that also lock them in place but end up killing them for the most part. As you can see from the clips in the background, the character, even at level 70, is able to decimate the entire timeline meta. Also keep in mind that I'm using the most basic supports that only provide me health. If I were to use ones that provided me with additional mitigation or additional damage, then you can see just how powerful the character is. And also keep in mind that I'm not really using an artifact, so I'm not really gaining too much from the instinct damage, and my CTP is a mighty one, so if I really wanted to push to the highest level, a brilliant one would really make her pretty scary. At level 80 the character gets even stronger, since you have an advantage versus level 70s in terms of critting and dodge and even ignoring dodge, so you'll be able to hit them more consistently and be able to dodge their attacks as well. As you can see from the clips, and I bet from facing her in timeline, the character is fairly tanky with a good survival based build, but also deals a really good amount of burst damage even when you're not using a proc. I'll cover all of her potential builds and the ones that I believe are the most ideal ones for her, but before I look at that, I just wanted to address some of the negatives that she has, with the most glaring one being her AI rotation or her skill priority. She usually opens up with the second skill, which is good in itself since it has that super guard break penetration and the iframe ignore. Then she goes into the fifth skill, which is also good because it has the lingering damage and also has super guard break penetration as well. But from there, she basically just cycles between the 2 and the 5th skill constantly and doesn't really ever go into her 3rd skill unless her skills are interrupted in some way. The reason that this is an issue is because she doesn't have healing natively in her kit and relies solely on the 3rd skill to build up the damage accumulation, which unlike other skills doesn't give her more damage but actually gives her healing. Without the AI utilizing this skill, you're basically relying on the character taking out the opponent before they do enough damage to whittle away your health entirely. Although this does seem like a significant issue since most PvP characters need health recovery in some manner to be able to have consistent performance, because her damage is so high and because she is so tanky and has so many iframe skills and moves around and everything, it's not really as glaring of an issue as you might think. Despite that, it is one of the flaws that the character has. Another one is that the second skill doesn't have an iframe itself, even though it is an iframe ignore skill. This means that when the second skill is cast, she is susceptible to taking damage, especially if there is damage already kind of raining down on the arena. Initially, it might not seem like the lack of an iframe on the second skill is that big of a dilemma, since she does move around a lot and can avoid damage. However, the second skill is the key reason why she has a pretty big vulnerability in her kit, because it makes her especially susceptible to reflect damage. It's also likely one of the few ways that the character will end up dying, being able to be hit by the opponent while she is going through the second skill, because if the AI prioritized the 3rd or 4th skill more often, then the character would be almost entirely in iframes, since the 4th and 3rd skill are full iframe skills. Despite these shortcomings, you can see that the character is still especially powerful and would pretty much be just absolutely broken if the AI rotation was adjusted a little bit more and she prioritized the 4th and 3rd skills. By the way, if you were wondering, the 5th skill also has 80% penetration, which lasts for 10 seconds, and because she spams it so frequently, it means that you almost always have 80% penetration against your opponent, meaning that they can't even hide with the use of the invincible effect. At T4, the character becomes even more ridiculous because she gains reflect on the T4 skill, and for the most part, you would likely think that you would never reach the T4 skill, but it charges very quickly for her, so you will be able to utilize it in PvP, and is the reason why I believe that the character is now in the #1 spot for timeline. Unlike other characters, because Jean can also get access to reflect, if the opponent is running double supports, you don't even necessarily have to use Molecule Man to get rid of those supports and be able to do damage. All you really have to do is just keep spamming your skills or let the AI spam them to build up to the T4 skill, and then let the opponent take themselves out with reflect. So taking all of these characteristics and effects into consideration, the top 3 builds or CTPs that I would recommend for the character are a Reforged Authority, a Reforged Refinement, or a Reforged CTP of Greed. Now, in terms of tank builds, if you want the character to be tanky by herself without the need of supports, you would run a mighty CTP of Authority, since you can get close to capping out the mitigation and take minimal damage. This is good if you want to have the team that she's on be a little bit more flexible in that you don't have to use supports. You can also use other characters like Hulk or Gorr, for example, and not have to rely fully on Jean to be able to do the work. However, if you want the character to be tankier with the use of supports, then a CTP of Refinement is better there, because you can build up the mitigation with things like Colossus or Shuri and take less damage while also being able to heal up without having to rely on the third skill. This option does make her tankier overall since she is healing a lot. However, you do need those supports, otherwise it's the same thing as if you're running Carnage without supports. He'll take more damage than he'll be able to heal, and you won't really see the benefits of the build. You also have to keep in mind that the opponent can also potentially counter your supports by using their own supports or things like Molecule Man to nullify those effects. If you want to go with an offensive build, a CTP of Greed is a good option too, because it does provide a little bit of healing, so you won't have to rely on the third skill as much, but it also provides a lot of burst damage, with the second skill being the one that opens and iframe ignores, meaning that you'll be able to proc the Greed and hit the opponent for a lot of damage very quickly. The other benefit is that you can in a way counter characters that stack a lot of mitigation when the ambush effect goes off, and you'll also be less susceptible to reflect, or basically take none at all. However, because she procs early right into the second skill, the reliance on taking less reflect damage from the ambush effect is pretty minimal. What I mean by this is that if you're facing an opponent that has the ability to reflect your damage, you're almost guaranteed that the character is going to die immediately to reflect damage, because she's going to deal so much so quickly, and there is a little bit of invulnerability when fights just start. I wouldn't necessarily recommend a CTP of Greed over the alternative options of an Authority or a Refinement, because once the character builds up to that T4 skill, you're almost guaranteed to take out the opponent, so it's in your best interest to keep the character alive as long as you can. However, despite that, the build is still good, since you can take out the opponent very quickly and not rely on the T4 skill, and if you are lacking some offensive stats, the CTP of Greed is very good in mitigating those. The reason that these three CTPs are above the rest is because the top proc provides you with super guard break protection, meaning that once it activates, you can't be locked down by super guard break penetration, and that is a major deal, especially when you're facing other characters in timeline now that just have so much of it, like Jean and Gorr. So if you want to utilize other things like a CTP of Rage or Judgment because she has guard break immunity built in natively, you can do that. You will get good use in PvE obviously, and some use in PvP. However, versus other opponents who have that super guard break protection, you will notice it because you will be locked down and won't be able to do anything. This is a reason why I don't really recommend a CTP of Transcendence, because it doesn't give you that protection, and if you want to use that to be able to reduce your reflect damage, it's not really the best option, because that doesn't really kick in till you're at about half health. By that point, you're more than likely going to die from the huge amount of reflect damage that you deal. Similarly, a CTP of Regen doesn't give you that protection either, and in fact the recovery rate doesn't affect the character in any way, because the healing is based off her skill as accumulated damage that gets converted to health. I found that the recovery rate doesn't affect that in any way, so you won't really benefit from that stat on the CTP. Refinement is a bit different because you get healing from the CTP itself, so you can utilize the recovery rate if I'm not mistaken. Also, if you were wondering whether the damage accumulation on the CTP of Authority negatively impacts the healing from the third skill, I don't believe it does, because they are different skills in itself. They have different effects, so they don't really interact with one another. If you want to get an idea of how to play the character on manual, you basically just want to open with the 5th skill and just wait about a half second till she kind of rises up, so those beams come down, and those are the important ones, which will lock down your opponent with super guard break penetration. From there, you want to go into your 2nd skill to basically kind of do the super guard break penetration again, but also knock the opponent out of their iframes, and from there you basically want to go straight into the 4th skill or the 3rd skill, because they are full iframe skills and you can hide from any damage. Because you're spamming so many skills, you're likely to get your T4 at this point or your ultimate, and you basically just use those when available. To counter the character, I found Ancient One and Emma with invincible builds to be the most effective because Jean is so susceptible to reflect damage. For either of these characters, you basically just want to stand in place, or to be more safe, you can switch right off the bat to be invulnerable and reflect more damage. Then go to the immediate other end of the arena, and when Jean is coming towards you and briefly stops, use your 4th skill, which will enter you in iframe, and you'll also lay damage on the map, which means that Jean will not only reflect damage to herself, but will also be hit by these skills because she is not in an iframe herself. This should allow you to take out both of Jean's lives pretty consistently. However, I found the safest option to be to switch to a reflect character right when Jean spawns, and then on her 2nd life switch to Hulk and immediately go into your 4th skill. It will allow you to avoid a bit of the damage right off the bat because of the invulnerability from the switch, and because Hulk goes into an iframe and has iframe ignore, it will allow you to one-shot Jean. If you fail to one-shot her, then the reflect character will be the next one that spawns in and will immediately take her out. If you're having trouble executing this tactic, there is another alternative that you can do, but it relies on you having to use Jean specifically to win the fight. You would basically add 2 element resist characters, such as Ancient One and Blue Marvel, that would up your element resist, or more specifically your fire resist, past 160 or 170, which is the soft cap, and it means that you'll basically nullify all the damage and only be able to take 1 to 2 damage max. As you can see, even at level 70, I was able to completely nullify all of the damage from a T4 Jean, and was only able to take damage when she used her reflect from her T4 or her ultimate skill that lowers the fire resistance down. However, when you get your own Jean to T4, you can basically just spam all your skills very quickly to get your reflect up and win that way. Keep in mind that this tactic is countered if the opponent also uses Ancient One or a character that raises element damage higher. Also note that this likely will be changed because you could previously do this with mitigation stacking and they had to change the formula so you couldn't do it, but there wasn't really any character that could abuse it with element resist stacking until basically Jean. In Alliance Conquest, the character isn't really as insanely broken as she is in Timeline, since in a 3 vs 3 format there's many characters that can hit her through the 2nd skill that she uses. However, she still is capable of taking out multiple metas just by herself because she is so strong offensively. Because the character is obviously meta, it's likely more valuable to look at counters to her, and just like in Timeline, reflect characters are a solid counter to her, like Emma, which will basically reflect the 2nd skill damage back to Jean right away. Because Jean does have the revive though, you can't totally rely on Emma to be able to take out both of her lives, which is why I would recommend pairing her with some decent other meta characters, specifically ones that may have another life or have lingering damage abilities or can stay in long iframes. Because Jean opens with the 2nd skill right away, that means she doesn't have access to the iframe ignore skill again and is susceptible to characters that have long iframes, like Doom for example. With Jean becoming so strong, and with Ancient One having not only reflect but element resistance, and the fact that you compare her with Wong to get invulnerability, means that she has become a really strong pick to be able to take out not only the first life of Jean, but both of them from the reflect damage and residual damage that she does. The character is just good in general, since I was even able to take out Silver Surfer and Thena right away because of her quick attacks. Destroyer and Phylavel are also decent options since they also have reflect. They won't necessarily take out both of Jean's lives, but will be able to take out at least one of them, which is good enough for wiping the team. If you've used up all of your reflect characters, you also have the option of using ones with very high mitigation. So characters like Carnage, for example, that have high mitigation and the Immortality artifact can build up their effects and be able to take out Jean by surviving her initial burst damage. Sorry the video got way too long, but there was a lot of stuff to cover. In summary, you basically want to pick up Jean because she is crazy in PvE and PvP, and in terms of what build you want to use, go with a CTP of Rage for PvE for the most part, and for PvP, it's really up to you between Authority and Refinement. The next video I'll be looking at is basically all 4 of the other mutants, which aren't nearly as good as Jean, and after that, I might actually look at Magneto and Magic since they were announced while I was making this video. Anyways, that is the video. I put a lot of effort into this one, so if you could please like and share it with others, it would definitely help me out. It probably will help them as well. Thanks again for your time and watching the videos. I always appreciate it, but the video is now over.